thanks for joining us again. My name is Doug Cook, your host for tonight. I'm the Education Events Coordinator for NOFA Mass, and along with me is Anna Gilbert Muhammad, our Food Access and Webinar Coordinator. Before we get started, I'd like to thank all of the NOFA Mass board and staff who've contributed to this production of the webinar, the 9th in a series of free Resiliency series online gatherings. We also want to thank our sponsors, Dr. Bronner's and Eaton Hemp. Dr. Bronner's makes pure Castile soap, hair and body care products of the highest quality and are committed to socially and environmentally responsible products, all one. And Eaton Hemp is your trusted source for USDA organic CBD products, always organic, always transparent. Most importantly, we want to thank you, the viewers and listeners, especially our members who make our education and advocacy work possible. If you find this event useful and inspiring, please become a NOFA Mass member or make a donation to support our important work. I'm really excited to introduce Afton, our presenter tonight. Afton Cyrus is the owner of Jam Sessions, where she has been delighting her customers with creative products, highlighting wonderful local New England farms and inspiring others to can and preserve at home. Her work at Jam Sessions led her to a new career as a test cook at America's Test Kitchen, where she develops recipes for their cookbooks.
Hi everyone, I'm so glad to have you here today in my home kitchen. Here in Arlington, Mass is where I live, so welcome. Got a couple hundred people due to visit my kitchen tonight. Pretty fun. I'm very glad to be here to share a little bit about preserving tonight, and thank you so much to NOFA for having me as part of this resiliency series, because I think we could all use a little bit more resiliency in these times. Tonight we're gonna make one batch of pickles and a batch of jam, and I hope that by the end of the presentation you come away with more confidence and knowledge and ways to use beautiful local produce that's just coming into season now here in New England. So I'm gonna jump in. I'll tell you a little bit about myself really quick. Thank you for the intro, Doug. I grew up in Maine, and I grew up canning. I started canning when I was a teenager. It was just something that our family did with our garden. The growing season in Maine is like this long. so canning was one way for our family to extend that harvest, take the things that were growing in our garden and transform them, share them with other neighbors and friends, and make the growing season last. Since then, I've become more involved with farms in Massachusetts, understanding what farmers are growing here, and again, teaching classes and finding ways to help people, again, take that beautiful in-season produce and turn it into something really delicious and fun. I spend my days working at America's Test Kitchen developing recipes. It's a lot of fun, and we can talk more about that later if people have questions about ATK. But this is something that I've become really passionate about, and a skill set that I think has been lost but is coming back. So I hope that tonight, if you are a very beginning preserver, you've never made a pickle, you've never made a jam, but you want to learn, great. If you are familiar but maybe need a little bit of a brush up, I hope I can help you there tonight. And if you're an expert and you have some advanced questions, I'm happy to try and tackle those as well. But hopefully you'll come away tonight with a few more tools in the resiliency toolbox. Just a couple of words to get started. There are many different ways to preserve and many different reasons to preserve, but essentially people have been preserving food for thousands of years. People have discovered that perishable things, you want a way to make them last longer. So preserving stops the clock, or at least slows down the clock on things that could spoil quickly, and transforms them into something new and delicious often, and makes it possible for you to enjoy those foods for longer. So if you think about, people who make salted fish or salted meats, drying things like herbs, drying things like meat for jerky, fermentation, if you think about milk, a very perishable product. If you use the preservation method of fermentation, you can transform that milk into yogurt, into cheese. You can pasteurize that milk, which again extends its shelf life. You can use the refrigerator or the freezer to bring that temperature down, to slow down the degradation of food. And then you can also can it, which is how I got introduced into preserving. So all of these different methods essentially are taking the microorganisms that can live in perishable food that could make you sick and making that an inhospitable environment and an environment that will preserve the fresh flavors and the good things in food for longer so you can enjoy it over a longer period of time. So tonight we're going to be focusing on the refrigerator. Hopefully you enjoy all of my photos behind me. But refrigeration and freezing are great ways to start out with preservation, with making things last. Many of you may be starting a garden for the first time right now. Maybe you're getting your first rounds of boxes from your CSA. Maybe you're a longtime farmer. But just right about now, we've got things just coming into market. You've got greens, you've got radishes, you've got beautiful rhubarb and strawberries and other berries coming down the pike. So things are coming, and this is a way that you can take all of that bounty, which feels like it's here for 2 weeks, sometimes especially with strawberries, and you can stop the clock. So tonight we're going to be making refrigerator pickles and refrigerator jams. They are both super easy, really fun, and a great way to get introduced into this world of food preservation. I would say that if you want to level up after tonight, after you get comfortable with quick pickles and refrigerator jams, you could try out fermentation and try out beginning boiling water bath canning, our next great places to go. And I'm happy to tell you more about those things later as well. All right, so let's get cooking. We're going to start with pickles. So this is a recipe for an all-purpose quick pickle brine. The nice thing about a quick pickle is that it's just what it sounds like. It's the fastest way to get from a raw vegetable to a pickled vegetable. And what we're going to be using tonight is just an easy vinegar brine. We're going to use, tonight I'm using cider vinegar, that's what I had on hand, and some water and some seasonings. That's going to create a brine. That brine helps to preserve the food. It infuses the raw vegetables that you use with flavor and helps lower the pH, so you have a higher acidic environment that helps that food to last longer in the refrigerator. So we're going to get started. Again, I'm going to go a little bit back and forth between these slides and to what I'm doing in the kitchen, but you can hopefully you found the link to these materials in the chat function of the Zoom, and you can pull it up for yourself on another screen and save it and use it going forward. We're going to make pickled radishes tonight. These beautiful local radishes. I love growing radishes and I hate raw radishes. They're so easy to grow and they're really colorful and pretty, and it's like I don't like that bitter flavor. So turning them into a pickle is a way that helps me enjoy them. So I have here on the counter that hopefully you will be able to see. I have about 1.5 cups of sliced radishes. I have a cup of cider vinegar, 3 tablespoons of water, and then I have 2 teaspoons each of kosher salt and sugar, sort of give you a sweet, salty brine. Then also some yellow mustard seeds and some black peppercorns for flavor. And I also have a sliced garlic clove. So these are just some basic your most basic pickling flavors: vinegar, salt, sugar, and then that black pepper and the yellow mustard seeds, garlic. Those are very classic flavors, but we'll talk about in a minute how you could change up the flavors. The nice thing about this brine and about this method is that you can get really creative with flavors. You're not as worried about food safety with the quick pickle, which we'll talk about in a minute. So this is, you have a little bit more latitude to make it the way that you want it. So I'm gonna add, let's see, I'm gonna add all of my brine ingredients. So that's the vinegar, water, all the seasonings, and the garlic. I'm putting in a small saucepan on the stove. I'll show you. And we're just gonna bring that up to a boil. That'll dissolve the sugar and the salt and just get that brine nice and activated. So I've got that coming up off to the side. In the meantime, I've got a pint jar, so I'm making just a pint of pickles tonight. In the materials, there's also a scaled up version of this brine if you want to make more pickles, if you want to make a quart, or if you want to make 2 pints and split it up and share one with someone else. So I'm in my 16-ounce pint jar. I'm just putting all of my radishes in there, as you can see. So just thinly sliced radishes. You want it to be almost full, but still have a little bit of room for your brine. So for a pint jar, that's about 1.5 cups of vegetables. But you could also, in a quart jar, you want a little bit more, about 3 cups of vegetables. It doesn't have to be exact. This was about 1 bunch of radishes. Use what you have. You can fill up the jar as full or not full as you wish. While our brine is coming up, let's talk about what else you can use as your base. So we're all pretty familiar with cucumber pickles. You know, that's the classic vegetable to pickle, and you definitely can use that with this brine. It won't have that deep dill pickle, kosher pickle flavor that you would get from a fermented pickle, and we'll talk about how they're different. But for these quick pickles, any of these other vegetables are great to use right now. So tonight I'm using radishes, but I love pickled red onions. They're amazing on a taco, as are the radishes. Shallots are great. Jalapenos. I have a friend who always has pickled jalapenos in her fridge, and she puts them on everything. For carrots, you could cut them into sticks, and then they're a nice little appetizer on a cheese board. Or a fun way that I like to prep carrots for this is with a vegetable peeler. Just peel the whole carrot into ribbons and then put that into your brine, and you'll find that it's really, get this nice little nest of carrots that you could put on a grain bowl or just on the, the side of a plate for another dish. Sliced fennel works well for this. Cucumbers, as I said, are classic. You can do cauliflower, so little florets of cauliflower. Trimmed green beans, just make sure they fit in your jar. Zucchini or summer squash, again, you could cut into coins or spears, or do the same trick with the vegetable peeler, peel them into ribbons. Really delicious. And you can even pickle rhubarb. A lot of people typically will put rhubarb in a strawberry rhubarb pie, also delicious, or make it into a rhubarb jam. But it can also be really delicious in a savory application. So again, this recipe is really flexible. So think about what you've got, think about what you're growing in the garden, think about what comes in your CSA box. If you're not sure what to do with it, just try pickling it, see how it works out. Just gonna stir the brine. It's just coming up to a simmer, starting to steam. Once it's ready, so I have my jar of vegetables ready to go. So whichever vegetables you are using. I'm also going to use a canning funnel. If you don't have one of these, that's okay. It just helps when you're pouring hot brine into a jar. The mouth of this funnel is the same diameter as a regular mouth canning jar. So it just helps to keep everything contained and not flood brine all over your kitchen counter. So this is a helpful tool. They come in metal, they come in plastic. They all work the same way. The metal ones are like a little more heavy duty, but whatever you've got will work. Or if you don't have one, just maybe ladle it in rather than pour it off from the saucepan. Just look out. And then as this brine is coming up, this next slide, this is where you can get really creative. Tonight I'm just making a very basic brine, but to have some fun with this recipe, there's a lot of ways you can get creative with flavors. So you could use sprigs of herbs, either in the brine or directly in the jar when you load it up with your vegetables. You could use citrus zest, like lemon, lime, or orange, or even grapefruit. If you peel some ginger, slice up some cloynes, put that into the brine. Whole spices and seeds, fennel seeds. If you want it hot and spicy, you can use red pepper flakes. Lots of different ideas here, and even ground spices, just a little bit goes a long way, but especially for the cauliflower, something like curry or garam masala works really nicely with that more neutral cauliflower background. So this is where you can have some fun and try it out, but a little bit goes a long way. So just be conservative at first and give it a try. You can always add more, but harder to take it back out. Our brine is bubbling away. I'm going to try and show you if I can. So here's, whoops, hopefully you can see our brine on the stovetop steaming away there. Oh, steamed up my camera. All right, you can see me again. So I'm going to just turn off the heat. Just have to bring it right up to a boil. Don't have to cook it very long. Just want to dissolve the sugar and the salt, get some of those flavors. The flavors infuse faster in a warm environment, so you're just kickstarting some of that transfer of flavors from these spices into the brine. So hopefully you'll be able to see. I'm going to put my canning funnel on, and I'm just pouring my brine right over. And you want it to cover the vegetables. You might have a little bit left over, but this looked like just the right amount. I'm going to use my spatula to take out, make sure all those garlic cloves and the peppercorns and the mustard seeds all make it into the brine, into the jar. So then you have something that looks like this. So you have all of your sliced vegetables in a brine, and it's pretty hot. It's pot cold. You're going to let it set aside until it cools down to room temperature, and then you're going to put it in the fridge. I'm going to just hop over here. So these are the steps that I was just demonstrating. We put our vegetables in the jar. We poured the hot brine over. We're going to let this cool all the way and put a lid on top. And then these do need a little bit of time to cure, not as long as a fermented pickle. Just about 3 hours will help those flavors infuse into the vegetable and into the brine. And then you can keep it in the fridge for at least a week, but I've definitely kept them longer than that as well. The brine will help it keep nice and preserved in the fridge. And this is what your final pickle will look like. You'll notice that the radishes have all turned pink from the pink flesh, the pink skins. So comparatively, you can see the before and the after, hopefully. And so all of those flavors have kind of melded at this point. I made these a couple days ago. They're really like tangy and tart and delicious. I'll try one for you. Again, I don't love radishes, but I do love these. Got that nice punch from the vinegar. And they're not sweet. If you did want to do more of like a bread and butter pickle, just up the sugar in your recipe. But they have a nice balance, some sweet and tart, They're crisp and crunchy. Because we didn't cook these vegetables, they retain more of their structure, so they get that nice crispness. And they're sort of salty, briny, really good. I think these would be really nice with some lime, or even maybe a bay leaf in there would be really tasty with these, but that's where you can really get creative. So I want to pause there. And again, maybe it helps now in full screen. I know that was like a tiny box in the background, but this is again are the ones we just made versus a couple days in the fridge. But I can pause there before we move to jam. I bet there are a lot of questions. So Doug or Anna, do you want to tell us more? Tell me if there's anything I can answer at the moment.
Since we're just pausing, I'll start with a couple of questions that came in. How packed in there should they be? Do you leave a headspace?
So because these are super easy refrigerator pickles, headspace is not an issue. So essentially, headspace is a gap of air left from the top of your mixture to the lid of the jar. This is critical when you're canning. So if we were turning these pickles, we were going to put them in a boiling water bath and can and seal our jar so that it was kept at room temperature indefinitely for a year. There's a lot more safety concerns, and that size of that air gap, that headspace, really matters in getting a good seal and having a safe final product. In this case, it doesn't matter. You can pack them as loosely or as tightly as you wish. You just need to make sure that it's all submerged, that there's enough brine to really get in between all the vegetables and that it's covered up from the top. But if you only had half as many radishes, that's fine. If you really wanted to pack it all the way up the top, you can, but I'd say roughly that 1.5 cups, so that I filled mine probably to about here initially with the raw radishes, and then there's room for the brine to pour over and to submerge it on the top.
Mm-hmm. A couple of folks asked if you could eliminate the sugar altogether.
You sure can. Yeah, it may be a little bit more vinegar forward, and you may find it a little bit salty. So it's there really as a background note to balance the brine. It doesn't taste sweet, but if sugar is an issue for you, you can definitely leave it out.
A couple of people who are talking about rhubarb, what would be the best spices to go along with that?
So for pickled rhubarb, I would do lemon. I think citrus and rhubarb work really well together. Or even something like coriander seed could be really nice with rhubarb. I would try it on its own first and like do a basic brine and sort of taste it and see what you think. And then sort of imagine the flavors that speak to you with that. But I love pickled rhubarb on a salad. It's really nice at this time of year with like really fresh greens, a little bit of pickled rhubarb, maybe even some like strawberries and balsamic in that salad. That's a great way to enjoy stuff at this time of year.
Mm-hmm. And some folks are asking about mustard seeds, and if you wanted to substitute mustard seeds, what would be?
So that's a great question. The mustard seed, the garlic, peppercorn, and mustard seed are just sort of your very classic pickle ingredients. But if that's not to your taste or you don't have them, you can definitely skip them and use any of the other whole seeds or spices that were on the list in that earlier slide. I don't know the best replacement for a mustard seed, but if you want a little bit more of the sort of zestiness that the mustard seed brings, you might want to try red pepper flakes if you want a little bit of heat. If you want just some texture and a little bit of flavor, I would try coriander seed or maybe fennel seed.
Mm-hmm. And would you recommend this recipe to go along with beets?
With beets, so beets you would need to cook first, unless you can shave them really thin. If you have a mandolin or if you're good with a knife, raw beets are really delicious that way. If they're bigger chunks or like quarters, roast them first and then you can use this technique. At that point, you may find that they're just a little bit too hard and tough if they're in bigger pieces and they haven't been cooked. That's my thought on beets.
And then a couple of people asked about how long is it lasting in the fridge?
I generally keep them, they definitely are safe for at least a week. I've kept them probably for a month. I would use your best judgment. They're not going to keep indefinitely if they haven't, since this is sort of a looser form of pickling, they will degrade a little bit over time. They may get a little bit soft. The flavors may change a little bit. Make sure that when you open anything you make that's been in the fridge, that give it a look. Make sure it looks and smells the way that you expect, the way that it went into the jar when it's coming out of the jar. If you're like, this smells a little funky, or there's mold, or there's any visible sign of microorganisms growing in there, when in doubt, throw it out. This should be your easy, quick thing that you can make enough that you just use up over the course of a week or two, versus this is not something that you're going to do for that longer term storage. If you did want to do long-term pickles, you can lacto-ferment your pickles, which is a whole other topic, but I'm happy to talk about it later. Or you would need to can them. Now, one note that I want to make really clear for both of these recipes tonight, these quick pickles and the refrigerator jams, just because you put it in a jar does not mean that it's safe to then take this jar and put it in a boiling water bath and seal it up and put it in your pantry. That's because canned goods are then held at room temperature instead of refrigerated, as these are meant to be. Because you're holding it at that warmer temperature, you're creating an environment where more microorganisms can grow. So there are stricter guidelines for what can be canned and what can't be canned. We live in an age where you can Google anything like, tamarind quince jelly, and then, it's beautiful and you love it and you put it in a jar and if you know how to can, you boiling water bath can it. That does not mean that recipe is safe, held at room temperature for that long period of time. It needs specific pH requirements, needs a specific acidity, needs specific processing time in the jar, in the water bath to make sure it's safe, etc. Lots of other caveats. So just make sure that you can't just can anything, but you can put anything in the fridge and it's pretty safe.
One more question before we move on. When do you think is the best time to put the herbs in? At the beginning, or when you put them in the jar?
It's either way. In this case, everything in the brine stays in the jar. So bringing it up on the stovetop just for that minute or two that gets it simmering starts to release the flavor. But certainly also when you pour it over in the jar, it will continue to infuse flavor as it sits in the jar over time. So it kind of depends on how forward you want that flavor to be. I would say that if you want like really strong dill flavor, mint flavor, you would put it in from the beginning and let it heat up in the brine. If you want it a little bit more subtle, I would just put it in the jar and pour the brine over, which will give it a little bit less of a presence. But in this case, you don't strain the brine, so all of these elements are going to be in there and they're going to continue infusing flavor as you let it hang out in the jar in your fridge.
That's great. Thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you for all those great questions. We are going to move now to jam. So I'm going to share my screen again, hopefully. Okay, so I do run a company called Jam Sessions. I love jam, I love fruit, I love jam, I love jelly. And this is a great way to get started with making your own jam from scratch. Similar to the all-purpose pickle brine that I put on, the earlier recipe in the slides, This is hopefully a pretty all-purpose jam, refrigerator jam, that couldn't work with any fruit that you have in season this summer. So the first fruit that really comes around in the spring and early summer is rhubarb, as we were talking about earlier. And it's strawberry season, my favorite season. It feels like it lasts for, again, 2 seconds here in New England. So when those strawberries come in, I really eat as many as possible and try and find ways to celebrate them, use them, because there is nothing like a local strawberry when you've been eating those dreadful Driscoll berries from the grocery store. So I'm going to change things up here. I'm going to put our pickles aside. And we're going to make strawberry rhubarb jam tonight. So grab all this stuff. Again, this recipe should hopefully work with whatever fruit you have on hand. And you want to start with about 3 cups of prepped fruit. So in this case, I have some finely chopped strawberries and finely chopped rhubarb. About 3 cups total, ended up being about 3/4 of a pound of strawberries and 1/4 of a pound of rhubarb. Again, because this is your easy beginner jam, it's a little more flexible. We're not canning this jam. You've got a little more latitude, so don't be worried about exact amounts of fruit. And then to that, we're just adding 2 simple ingredients: white sugar and lemon juice. So I know people ask a lot about sugar. The sugar here is not just for flavor, it is also structural. Because we're not using pectin in this jam, which I'll explain in a moment, this sugar is here also to make the jam set or gel. How long you cook that sugar, the temperature that you cook it to, determines how fluid the mixture will be at the end. So it is important to use this amount of sugar. You can play with other sweeteners if you prefer maple or honey or agave, but in this case, this is what is really going to get you to the right texture that you're looking for. I will just move ahead here. Okay, so you can get creative here. Oh, I actually didn't put in, sorry, I skipped ahead a slide. So this is a list of fruit that you can use in this recipe. Again, tonight we're using a combination. You can mix and match. So it can be fun to use berries and stone fruit together. Think about, things that are in season at the same time and that they'll taste pretty good together. So raspberry and peach, or blueberry and plum. You can even do, I don't have it on here, I was thinking more of the summertime, but apples and pears. And you can use frozen fruit. So if you have strawberries coming in left and right now, you go strawberry picking. If you want to put those in the freezer, stop the clock, then you can pull them from the freezer and use them in jam later, because we want the fruit to break down. So the frozen fruit will become a lot more mushy than your fresh fruit, but that's a good thing in a jam. It gets it nice and broken down and delicious. So I've got my strawberries and rhubarb in the pot. I'm adding a cup of white sugar and 3 tablespoons of lemon juice. You can use bottled or from a fresh lemon in this recipe. And putting that all in together. As with the pickles, you can get creative with flavors, but we'll talk about that maybe while this jam comes up. But here's what we're gonna do. The first step is I actually put 2 small plates in the freezer, and I'll show you why as we get cooking. Now I've combined my prepped fruit, my sugar and lemon juice, and if I were adding some flavors, I would also add them at this step. And I'm just gonna put this pot over medium-high heat. So you can see right now, like, it's just fruit and sugar and lemon juice. Nothing too remarkable, but it will transform with a little bit of time and a little bit of heat. So we're gonna bring this up to a boil. So we want that nice rapid bubble, so that I'm just giving it a bit of a stir here, get it going. So we're going to put that over medium high and bring it up until everything is bubbling. And then we'll move to our next step. But to go back a step, again, this is a basic, classic jam, just fruit, sugar, and lemon juice. But again, you can get creative. If you wanted to add a little bit of a finely chopped herb, you could add it in here. I do a blueberry basil jam for jam sessions, which is really popular. I also do a blackberry ginger jams, which just has grated fresh ginger stirred into it. So you can think about unusual flavor combinations that speak to you. If you wanted to use a hearty herb like rosemary or thyme, you could put that in the pot and let it infuse into the mixture. You could add grated lemon, lime, orange, or grapefruit zest if you want sort of citrus and fruit combination. You could even put a little bit of wine or some spirits in there. I do a peach and bourbon, or pear and bourbon is really delicious. And then warm spices work really well with jams, things like cinnamon, cardamom, cloves. A little bit goes a long way with all of these. So just a little pinch here and there in the pot will help you, explore some new flavors and bring out flavors in fruit. And if you like it spicy, you could put in chili. You could put in some jalapeno or habanero if you're feeling very adventurous. And it'll be the spicier if you leave the ribs and the seeds in, less spicy if you take those out before you mince up your fresh chili. So we're waiting for this to come up to a boil, and then we are going to mash it with a potato masher to help it break down and get that nice, get everything combined and get it really spreadable and delicious. Let me speak a little bit about thickening. And then if you have jam questions, we're going to be here letting this cook for a few minutes. So we'll have a little bit of time. And then also some larger questions about preserving. But okay, so what is jam is a great question. Jam is just a cooked mixture of crushed fruit. So jam has fruit pieces in it. So we're keeping all of these strawberry and rhubarb pieces in our final product. And that's what gives it texture when you sort of spread it out on your piece of toast. If we were making jelly, we would do a similar process, but cook that fruit in water or juice and then strain it so that all you're left with behind is the fruit juice that then you thicken. So that's why jelly is like clear and translucent looking and doesn't have those fruit pieces. Marmalade has citrus rind in it. So orange marmalade has like pieces of orange peel. There's also things like conserves, which are popular in Great Britain, which have dried fruit and nuts. So, but all of these are preserves. All of these are spreads, fruit spreads, and they all transform raw fruit into thick, spreadable fruit. How do they do that? So one way to do that is with sugar, which is the simplest way that we're using tonight. So sugar obviously brings sweetness to a recipe. It's important for flavor, and we do want jams and jellies generally to be a little bit sweet, but it also is structural in this case, which means that as the sugar cooks, it essentially candies or caramelizes. So as the temperature rises, the water in that sugar and in the mixture evaporates, and the sugar turns into this candy-like substance that thickens the mixture. So that's why this ratio of fruit and sugar is important in this recipe. If you don't want to use as much sugar, which I actually don't in jam sessions, I use pectin. Pectin is a naturally occurring substance in fruit. Many fruits have a lot of natural pectin in their cell walls and skins. So apples have a lot of pectin in their skins, in their cores. Oranges actually have a lot of pectin too. Blueberries have a lot of pectin. And that's what that sort of thickening gel stuff. So commercial pectin is derived from those plants. It's derived from fruit, and it then is dried out and ground up into a powder. You can add that powder to your mixture, and that will cause it to thicken. Much like gelatin or tapioca or cornstarch, It's something that will add that thickness to the mixture and that will cause it to gel. You can buy like ball pectin or sure gel pectin. The only thing that is tricky about those is that they're actually sugar activated. So they still require some white cane sugar in order to activate, in order to gel. I use Pomona's pectin for jam sessions, which you can buy at Whole Foods and other natural food stores and online. And it is a calcium activated pectin, which is very nerdy, but it also comes in the box. There's the powdered pectin and a little packet of powdered calcium that you mix with water. When you put those two things together in your mixture, it will automatically thicken no matter what, and you could use no sugar at all. You could use an alternative sugar like honey or brown sugar, maple, agave, any of those. So that's what I use for my products with jam sessions and when I'm making larger batches. When you're making such a small batch like this, though, it's hard. Like, you just need a teeny bit of pectin. In this case, the easiest thing really is to thicken it with sugar, but you can play with Pomona's pectin. It comes in the box with like a little packet, a table that tells you how much to use for how much amount of fruit. Before we jump into questions, I just want to show you what's happening in the pot. Hopefully, okay, so here, hopefully you can see, is our pot of now is really bubbling and boiling away. I'm going to use this potato masher and mash up the mixture. Hopefully not fog the camera. Just helps the rhubarb especially to break down and get soft. We're releasing the juices from the fruit and really getting it going. Delicious, smells so good. I wish you could smell it, you guys. So now the next step in our recipe, we're going to just keep this simmering, and we're waiting for that sugar to thicken. We're waiting for when I drag a spatula on the bottom, it leaves a trail that doesn't really fill in very quickly. If you have an instant read thermometer, you can also check the temperature. It's a little hard to temp jam. It's hard to it's kind of different in different places. There's not a ton in this pan, so it's a little bit hard to get an accurate reading, but you want to be around 218, 220 for that sugar to have caramelized and candied to provide the structure and the thickness. Okay, so that's, for this one, probably gonna take about another 10 minutes. So now we have 10 minutes, and I bet there are questions.
Yes. One person asked if adding apples would help thicken it.
Yes, you can definitely add a grated apple, keep the skins on, and that will help with some thickening if you want to back down on the sugar a little bit. It will add apple flavor as well, so you just want to make sure that you want that flavor in your finished product.
Mm-hmm. And someone asked, can they use Demerara sugar instead?
Demerara sugar. Demerara sugar is a raw sugar and a larger crystal of sugar. So I actually don't know because it may not be the same. Using an equal volume won't be the same quantity by weight. So I don't know, but I would look it up. There's a great book by Marissa McClellan. She's a great blog called Food in Jars, which I have a link to at the end of this presentation. She wrote a book called Food in Jars and then a book called Naturally Sweet Food in Jars, where she explored alternative sugars to white cane sugar, so she would have more guidance on the amount you would need for something like this.
Mm-hmm. And how long would your jam last in the fridge?
Oh, so this jam will last quite a good long time. Sugar is also a preservative, so it helps it to stay fresh and stay good in the fridge. I'm going to double check. I think I say in my recipe that we tested in the test kitchen. We did a storage test when we were working on recipes like this. So at least 2 months for this particular jam. Same rules apply. When in doubt, throw it out. If you see visible signs of something looking not quite right, just make a new batch. But hopefully, since it only makes about 2 cups, it'll be, it won't last that long because you will have eaten it all. More questions?
You mentioned using nuts as a way to preserve.
So it's not a way to preserve necessarily, but it is a style of fruit preserves called a conserve. So some conserves that are especially popular in Europe will include nuts and dried fruit in the mixture. It's just for flavor and texture. It doesn't necessarily change the preservation quality of it. In fact, nuts, since they spoil and they have oils, they would be great to use in this application because they're just being stored in the fridge. For canning purposes, you just need to be careful about how much you would be adding to the mixture overall, because generally when you can something, you don't want to be using any fat because it can turn rancid over time in the jar if it's kept at room temperature. But for something like this, you could play with it. You could do something with peanuts, with almonds, a little bit of like currant in there. You get creative. And you can look up recipes for conserves too.
Mm-hmm. And when it's boiling away on the stove, do you stir it a little bit? And then after mashing it, how much do you stir it?
So the mashing you pretty much only need to do at the beginning. But if you have fruit, this is a good time to say you should be using ripe, peak season fruit. It should be generally like soft, but not totally falling apart. Although you can, since you are mashing it up, it's a good way to use something that's about to go. If you're using something that's underripe, you might find that it has a harder time breaking down, and it actually hasn't, the natural sugars haven't really come through in the fruit yet. So you might need to mash underripe fruit a little bit more, but usually once it gets going and you can just mash it that one time. I am stirring it though, as I'm taking your questions. So just periodically, you don't need to do it constantly, but it's pretty hot as that, again, the sugar is heating up, the mixture is being held over medium-high heat. It's going pretty hard, so you don't want to get scorching or sticking on the bottom of the pan. So it's good to, this is not a moment that you can really step away. You want to keep an eye on it. It's pretty vigorous, and you want to keep a good close eye on it.
Could I put some crushed pineapple in it?
Sure, let's do it. Crushed pineapple sounds really good.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, you can use frozen fruit for canning. So if you wanted to do a combo of something, that maybe you got locally or that you grew or you got from a farm with something that is harder to source here, like pineapple, not really growing in Massachusetts at the moment, to my knowledge, then that's a fun way to play with flavors. Again, because this is a refrigerator jam, you're keeping in the refrigerator, you have a lot more latitude to play with ingredients. Pineapple actually is a tricky ingredient, as is melon and some other ones that will change the pH of your mixture in a way that you have to be careful of if you're canning it. But in this case, you're pretty safe.
And you mentioned putting the plates in the freezer. Why is that?
Aha, that's a perfectly timed question. Whoever asked that question, thank you. So I'm keeping an eye on our mixture here on the stove. The plate is a sneak preview. So you'll find that jam, and I'll show you again, like jam on the stove doesn't look like jam in the jar. It's a liquidy, bubbling mass. Oh, lost my thing. And you want to make sure that you know what your jam is going to look like when it cools down. So right now it's really hard to say, like, I don't know, it's bubbling away. It seems hard to tell if it's, how do you know when it's ready? I'm just, sorry, my laptop stand fell down. So the plate test is one way that you can travel forward in time to see what it's going to look like. I'm just about, I think, ready to do the plate test right now. So when you think, you've been stirring your jam, you've been keeping an eye on it, it's looking thickened, it's glossy, and when you drag your spatula through the mixture in the pan, you want to feel some resistance. and you want to see a little bit of a trail of the empty pan underneath. We're not quite there yet with this one, so I don't want to jump the gun. But when it is ready, when you think like, okay, I think we're close, that's why I popped those freezers and those plates in the freezer. We're going to, when you think you're there, we're going to turn off the heat and spoon a little bit of this super hot jam onto that chilled plate. Pop it back in for a moment. That will cool the jam down to room temperature really quickly. And that's what we want to see. So then we'll take it out and take a look at it and see if it looks the way that you want it to look, if it looks like the texture is right. If it looks really runny on the plate, it means you have to keep going. You need to cook a little bit more. That's why you have a second plate in there so that you can do the test again, like cook it for a couple more minutes till you, again, think it meets that visual, and then repeat the test. And that's just, again, a way that, because if you stopped now, it's hard to know. I mean, if you have a thermometer, that definitely helps to know sort of if you're in the range of temperature for that cooked sugar, which I'm going to check right now. It looks like we are at, we're only at about 213, so we have a little bit ways to go. Sometimes it'll plateau for a little while and spike up as the water cooks off. And this will vary depending on how juicy your fruit is and how ripe it is. But essentially you can get close, but if you just stop there, it's a little hard to know, are we done yet? Are we there yet? So the plate test is a way to preview. And I will also say if you end up with something that is a softer set than you wanted, if it's a little loose and a little runny, you just call it a topping and you put it on ice cream and it's delicious. So it may not be that harder, thick set for a jam, but it'll still be delicious to eat, and I bet you'll find a way to use it up. Okay, so my mixture, I'm gonna try and show you, it's very hard to do holding a laptop, but hopefully you can see in there. You can see that you see a little bit of the pan underneath as I drag the spatula through, a little bit of a window as I drag it. It's getting pretty close. So I'm going to turn off the heat and pull the pot off of the burner so that it's not continuing to cook on that hot burner. Let me get my plate. And a spoon. I'm just going to spoon a little bit of this mixture onto the plate so you can see. So just, a teaspoon, tablespoon-ish. And then I'm going to pop this back in the freezer for a minute. Oh, feels good. It's hot work at this time of year to be cooking in the kitchen, to be boiling things, but it's worth it. So we're just letting that hang out just for a moment. We don't want to freeze it, but we just want to quickly get it to room temperature so that we can take a look at it. And we're going to do a finger drag test. So I'm going to just run my finger through that little blob on the plate and see what it does. It's, 30 seconds. Let's give it a see. It's very chilled, so hopefully pretty good. So you can see that it kind of is staying put on the plate, which is because it's a little bit soft, but that's all right. I'm going to run my finger through it. And then you get to do this. That's the best part of this test. And this is what you want. You want to see that it has a trail that doesn't immediately close up when you run your finger through it. If I ran my finger through and it just went whoop, it just closed right back up. Or if it looked really runny on the plate, then you need to go a little bit further. But I think this is looking pretty good. Tastes really good. So you've got this hot jam in your pot. Again, it's going to look really liquidy. It's going to look like it's not jam. That's not jam. That's just juice. But that's okay because it's still, again, that sugar is still liquid and hot. Because it's so hot, it's a good idea to warm up your jar. Glass does not love to change temperature. So if you sort of shock a colder jar with a hot mixture, then it has more likelihood to crack. So I'm just gonna put this in the sink for a minute and run a bunch of hot water into this jar just to warm it up a little bit. I'll dump it out. It's okay if it's still a little bit wet. And then we will transfer our mixture. Or the alternative is just let this mixture on the stove cool down for a moment, for 10, 15 minutes, and then transfer it. It's helpful for it to be somewhat fluid still so that you can get it all out of the pan and into the jar. But if you want to just let it cool down so you're not shocking your jar. Let me heat up my jar.
And while you're over there, should you sterilize the jars for this?
Great question. So because, again, you're holding these products at room temperature, there's less risk of spoilage and less risk of bacteria or microorganisms that can make you sick growing inside the jar. The jars need to be clean and dried. So before you start, you need to wash them in hot soapy water and dry them so that there's nothing in there from, being in your drawer, being in your cabinet for the last several months. You need to be clean. And in this case, you don't need to sterilize them. If you want to, you can. It doesn't hurt. You can boil the jar in a pot of boiling water for 10 minutes, or if you have a dishwasher with a sanitize function, then you can do both at the same time. You can wash and dry your jars and get them up to a temperature that sanitizes them. It's a good step just to eliminate any risk, but because it's in the fridge for storage, it's very unlikely that there would be anything in there that could grow in that environment. You do sterilize jars generally before you can, because again, they're going to be held at room temperature for a longer period of time. So there's more risk of spoilage and more risk of something being in there that you don't want to be in there and growing in an anaerobic environment. Let me get my jar.
As well, another question came through about the size of the recipe. Could you double it? Does it affect the process?
Good question. So in this case, the answer is maybe. It's not a very helpful answer. So the surface area of the pot you use and the amount of stuff inside matters because you're cooking off moisture and you are using, again, the sugar structurally. So you could try it. It's better to do back-to-back batches if you want more than one or if you do double it, you're going to need a larger pan because if it's double the amount of stuff in the pan, it's harder for the water to evaporate and it will take longer to get to that temperature and you're going to just cook the heck out of that fruit and you're going to lose some of the freshness. But if you went up a pot size, if you have like a larger stock pot or pasta pot or a Dutch oven, then I would say yes, as long as there's enough surface area for all of that liquid to evaporate. If you just have this large saucepan, I would do them back to back to make sure that you get the right set. If you were using pectin, then it would be less of an issue, but because we're not here, it is going to affect the cook. I'm going to pause questions just for a moment because my jar is hot. I've got my my funnel in there. I'm going to try and show you what I'm doing if I can. So I've got my hot jam, and I'm going to use a ladle and just transfer it to my jar. You can see it's pretty steamy. If you want to put a dish towel or a paper towel underneath your jar, sometimes that can be nice again. Or on a wood surface like this cutting board helps just to absorb the temperature to help the glass adjust temperature more slowly. If you put this on a cold countertop, like a cold stone countertop, it's more risk again of the glass changing temperature and cracking. So you don't want to have done all this work and then lose your jar. If you don't have, because again, because we're not canning any of these recipes, you don't actually need to use a canning jar. You can use a Tupperware, you can use any container you've got with a lid so that you've just got it in the fridge and you can enjoy it as you wish. So here is our jam, a little bit less than 2 cups. It's always going to vary based on your fruit. And then this is the finished jam. This is one I made a couple days ago, so pretty good. Pretty accurate. You want to make sure, again, that this cools to room temperature, that you put a lid on the jar, and then you store it in the refrigerator. The finished texture of the jam, so the one we just made, as you can see, is still very liquidy because it's still very hot. But this refrigerated one has a nice set to it. It's still a little bit soft, but not quite as liquidy. And it's going to, again, be a range. It depends on how long you cook it. But it is super delicious. I know it seems like a lot of sugar, 3 cups of fruit to 1 cup of sugar. And I'm very sensitive around sugar. Like, I think we use a lot of sugar when we don't need it. But as I said, in this case, it's structural, but it doesn't read sweet. It's not that tooth aching Smucker's jam sweet. You mostly get that nice hit of the lemon juice. In this case, I did, again, about 2 to 1 strawberry rhubarb, so the nice tangy rhubarb in there. You'll find it's not as sweet as you might think. Again, if sugar is a sensitivity of yours, you can play with that Pomona's pectin and see and try use no sugar at all, or use some of these alternative sweeteners to get your jam to set.
Can I ask about tomatoes? I've had tomato jam. Is this a recipe you can use up?
Yeah, I make a tomato jam for jam sessions, and it's super delicious. Tomatoes are a fruit. To that jam, I add brown sugar because I like a little bit more of that caramelized flavor. You're going to want to add a little bit more lemon juice. Tomatoes are right on the line of acidic and not. So a little bit extra lemon juice is a good idea. To that one, I also add a little bit of ginger, and it has that nice, like, almost tangy ketchup-y flavor, which is really great on like a biscuit or a piece of cornbread. But yes, you can use tomatoes and use the same method, and you could even burst your cherry tomatoes this way too, or chop up fine ripened tomatoes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So just before we end, and I am happy to take a couple more questions, but in case these are your questions, these are a few resources that I recommend if you're interested in learning more about preserving. As Doug mentioned, I work at America's Test Kitchen as my full-time job as a recipe developer there. I came on board to help write this book, Foolproof Preserving. It is a really excellent resource if you're a beginner or a seasoned canner. It has really fun, fresh, modern, small batch recipes. Some of the recipes we did today were inspired by recipes in this book. So Foolproof Preserving is a great resource. It has pickles. It has a section on, again, canned vinegar pickles, quick pickles, which we did today, and even fermented pickles. It has these easy refrigerator jams, but also instructions for canning jam. It has a section on tomatoes. It has some savory spreads and lots of different ideas. And then a couple others that I love are food in jars. As I mentioned earlier, Marissa McClellan has some great resources in a few different books. The Joy of Pickling is a classic by Linda Ziedrich, if you're really into pickles. And then Mrs. Wheelbarrow's Practical Pantry, which has the best title of all, has, again, a more comprehensive resource for all sorts of different types of preserving. So those are ways to go. Also, your local extension service will have lots of resources on home canning, home preserving. The USDA has resources as well. So those are great places to go, especially to learn about food safety, how to make sure you're doing this in a way that is safe. I did also include my email address, and if you want to follow me on Instagram, you can follow my Jam Sessions account at Jam Sessions Jam, which is canning related, and we'll talk about what workshops I've got coming up. And then for more adventures in the test kitchen and just general home cooking, Afton Cooks things, we'll have lots of things that I'm making at home that maybe would inspire you. I'm happy to take any last questions though.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I had bought something in a little gourmet store. It was jalapeno and onion jam. Is there any way that you have to treat onions differently in a jam than fruit?
I wouldn't add them raw. I would make sure you're caramelizing them first. So I would cook your onions well in your pan first before adding your other ingredients, just to make sure that, again, they've released a lot of their water and that you get more of the sweeter onion flavor than the more raw onion flavor. And then you could add chilies, you could add sugar. Again, in a refrigerator jam, it's safe to use vegetables like onions, like peppers. You can even put bacon in for like a bacon onion jam. Because it's stored in the fridge, that makes it safer. If you were pickling this and canning it, there's a lot more restrictions around the acidity of that mixture. But in this case, you're freed up to kind of play a little bit more.
Awesome, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Afton. Next week, we have our webinar. It's called Grow Food Everywhere, No-Till Gardening and Farming with Cardboard, Tarps, and Cover Crops. Our host, I'll be your host again, and we will be speaking with Ricky Baruch of Seeds of Solidarity Farm and Education Center next Friday, the 12th. It'll be at 5:30 p.m. And we have another webinar slated for next week on Thursday, which is all about making cheese. So we'll have Cliff Hatch, who is a veteran farmer and cheese artisan, and he'll guide us through the process of making farmstead cheeses. He's the farmer at Up and Gill Farm in Gill, Massachusetts. As well, our NOFA Summer Conference is going online for the first time. It's running from July 20th through June 9th. And even though we aren't meeting in person this year, that doesn't mean you can't attend the NOFA Summer Conference. So it'll have over 60 workshops and speakers ranging from agroforestry to vermicomposting and everything in between. Lots more about food and preserving and growing your own food and that sort of thing. So this year it's a virtual conference, and you can register for the live events similar to this one. As well, you can sign up to get the video recordings. And I want to thank you all for joining us. And if you found this event inspiring and helpful, you are invited to become a member. You're also invited to make a donation to help us support this important work during this difficult time for everyone. You can find out more about all of our events on nofamass.org/events. And again, thank you to our sponsors, Dr. Bronner's and Eaton Hemp. With that, I hope you all have a great night. I look forward to you all being a part of the NOFA community and seeing you again next time. Thanks.